so that we make sure that when we move into the session where we're getting your feedback, we make sure that we've got as many people with diverse thoughts and perspectives as possible, because it will be important then. So it is 5:01. I'm going to give everybody till 5:05 to do that, and then we'll get settled down again, and we will start the presentation.
I mean, I'm not even
It's all right.
It's all right. Thank you so much. I can't be honest.
Okay, I think that went a little quicker than I expected, and you all did a really great job initially getting at a table where you are going to be sitting for the rest of the night. So thank you. I believe whatever food and drinks are left over, you can help yourself when you need to, but we're going to make sure that this is a very productive night and that we all walk away feeling charged up to do something, okay? Because while this is a planning process, we do think that we're going to hope that there's going to be some inspiration tonight. There are a couple of you're going to engage. In your folders, you're going to have a worksheet like that on the left. It's two-sided that you can use to guide your review of the materials we're going to share with you in a minute. Jared and I are going to go through a lot of this information. It's going to be a lot. I'm just going to warn you right now, strap yourselves in because this is going to be a lot of information. And there's no shortcutting it. It all is really important, so we want to make sure that you get it all. But you will have access to all of this. Don't worry about writing a bunch of notes, but we do want you to reflect on the questions that are on that questionnaire, the worksheet that you have, while you're listening to what we're sharing. So that you, when you get into your conversation with your table facilitators, you will have that to remember because there will be a lot we're going over. Another way we'd like you and invite you to engage is through the QR codes that are at your table. You simply take a picture with your phone. It will take you to a Google Doc. And we ask you 3 questions. I liked, I wished, I wonder. So if there are things throughout the course of the night that you would like to hear, yes, my DC travel buddies are in the back, hey, I just saw that. Yeah, we just did this with the Department of Labor meeting in DC, and it worked really well. We'd love to hear from you throughout the course of the night. Was there something you were left wondering? Was there something you wished we did or talked about that we didn't get to? And what did you like? This is going to be really important information for us as we go progress through this planning process, and so please do that, and you can do it as often as you want. It goes directly into Google Doc for us that we'll be reviewing. We will be repeating the slide multiple times tonight, just to remind you that these things are there for you as tools. All right, so let's get into it. What we know is that we have a very daunting task ahead of us, right? This idea of fixing the childcare crisis is not a small thing, and it's not for the faint of heart. For those of us who've been in it for a while, we realize the challenges and how wicked this problem is. But we also want you to be assured that we don't have to fix it all at once. There are things that we can actually identify that are our parts of this work, that when we all do something differently and we all contribute, we can actually make a lot of progress. So I don't know how many here are familiar with this comic, right? Who wants change? Everybody. Who wants, I made my own edits here, who wants to plan for that change? I don't see any hands there, right? There's a flag that's just kind of hovering over their heads. Everybody's looking a little sad. And then who wants to lead it? Everybody leaves, right? Well, Pulse rose their hands and said somebody needs to develop a childcare plan for this region, and we would love to do that. So that's why we are here tonight, is that we are in this process of trying to create a plan, a comprehensive plan that will address the childcare challenges and crises that we all face, regardless of sector right now. I want to introduce the team that made tonight possible and this plan possible. This is not just Pulse doing it. We have a cross-sector steering committee. We also have the Pulse team here. Our names are up here, but if this is you and you are on this slide, please stand up. Come on, folks. Oh, Liz got the. There's an orange in the lobby for you. I'll make sure that you get that as a prize. We are so incredibly grateful to everybody for how well they've engaged. If you want to identify who one of us is at all tonight, you have a green dot. The folks on the steering committee have a green dot on their name tag. So find us if you have any questions that we can help you with, please. If you'll notice here, we've got folks from the Upjohn Institute, we've got folks from the Calhoun Intermediate School District, that didn't make that up there. Eric, I hope your boss isn't in the room and gets you in trouble, just as the Early Childhood Support Network. Southwest Michigan First, the City of Battle Creek Unlimited, Michigan Works, through Upjohn, the Kellogg Foundation, and then we also have Mosaic over on the west side that the coast is representing. All right, so thank you all for everything. And see, come on, let's get a little more excited there. Okay, so who is Pulse, you might be asking, if you don't know who we are. I'm going to tell you who we are, okay? We are a small but mighty team that has been at it since 2012. We were founded under the principle that if folks have the tools they need to do their work better so that we get better outcomes for children, things will be better, right? So we have a few ways that we do that. We are outcome driven and we build systems. This is really about us understanding the systems, not trying to change people, but trying to change systems. How do we understand those as well as we can so that we can collectively and creatively address those things that need to be fixed. We are partners in action learning. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And we actually incubate a lot of stuff through innovations that need to be done if there are no homes for those things yet, right? We help leverage a lot of resources for the early childhood space, most predominantly in Battle Creek and Calhoun County, but we are working more regionally now. So how do we position our partners to be in a place where they can actually attract the money that they need, the investments that they need to get this work done? We are neutral facilitators in that we do not deliver any direct programming. So we're not sitting in any sort of competition with any of our partners that are at the table because we are not trying to reach the same families they are. There is really this idea of us being kind of in a press box and being able to see things that others can't. We advocate fiercely on behalf of early childhood everywhere we can. And we are supply builders. That's a big part of what we're doing right now, is how are we making sure that we are aligning the systems across all sectors so that we can build the supply of childcare when and where we need it. The one thing I want to really lift up that isn't on the diagram that I just added last night is that we are wicked problem-solving facilitators. And if you're asking yourself, what is a wicked problem, Kathy? I'm going to tell you. This is what a wicked problem looks like. So the foundation, everybody's going to memorize this, and we're going to have a test later. I don't expect anybody to read all of this, but the point in including it is this is a root cause analysis. It is the foundation of which Pulse does all of its work. We want to make sure that when we are doing our work, it is centered, grounded on what is actually happening from the perspectives of people who are experiencing the problem, people who are working with the problem, people who are leading in decision-making around the problem, and people who are actually supporting all of those, right? So our goal is to understand a problem as well as we possibly can so that whatever strategies get developed, we know that they're addressing the root cause. So if we look at what our goal is, which is all families in Region 8 have equitable access to childcare that is quality, affordable, and aligned with their needs, we want to know what gets in the way of that, right? That's our wicked problem, is whatever barriers people are experiencing to those things happening. Now, what we know, based on a lot of the work we've done, is that cost is one thing. Anybody here struggle to pay for childcare throughout the course of their life? Show of hands. Anybody really struggling right now? Right? Yeah, this is not a small thing. We know a couple things about that, right? There's a challenging subsidy system, so even if you qualify for subsidies, people struggle there. That's a systemic problem, it's not a people problem. We have to make sure that we're working on that system, right? And we know that there are too few employer financial supports, so even people who are working not many employers are offering the kind of supports that would be really helpful. So we know that the reason for that, we're asking another why, is that there's a lack of understanding or tools to navigate what is possible. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later today. So what you see and what I want you to take away from this is that we are trying to align any strategies we develop based on this root cause. What is it that we need to address? And we're going to try and help you and orient you as we go through the data tonight to point to which of these root causes the things that we're talking about can address, right? So you'll see in the green that surrounds the dark green one about what gets in the way, those are our main root causes, right? Cost, families not knowing where or how to find childcare. That if you're pregnant, you are trying to navigate this as a new parent, that is a real challenge, right? We don't have enough slots. We all know this, we're feeling this, that's a real challenge. Misalignment between brain research and research. I knew there was going to be a typo and I just found it. Hopefully that's it. Research and current practice, lack of financial or business supports for childcare entrepreneurs, we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and inadequate funding and investment. We know that there is no market solution to the challenge we find ourselves in, and you're going to hear that repeatedly. To be pushing for public investment in childcare, otherwise we're going to keep rearranging the furniture Titanic, right? We need to make sure that we're doing all we can to advocate. So I'm gonna move on from this, but just keep this in your mind as you can, and you will have this to access later, and hold us accountable to making sure that we're actually working on root causes. So what is this plan of which we speak? This plan is something that the state of Michigan has said to each of its MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation regions, that we need to have a comprehensive plan that is inclusive of economic developers, municipalities, childcare providers and business owners, families, and all of the partners that surround childcare, so that we know that we're gathering all of the best perspectives to understand what the issue is, and that we can all align ourselves in a way to a singular goal to improve the supply and the quality of the childcare that we offer. Our counties are featured here, you should all know because you're from one of them. And our goal is to accelerate community-level cross-sector efforts to address this crisis. So we all play a role in this room, every single one of us. We want to make sure that you walk out of this room tonight knowing a little bit more about what your role is. And a good plan always begins with the right questions, right? We talked about the root cause analysis. Beyond that, the questions we need to be asking ourselves. What is the current state of childcare in the region? Jared's going to help us understand that, right? So we're going to be turning it over to him in a few minutes. He's going to talk about a lot of the data that we've gathered. We want to know what existing resources, policies, and practices support a childcare-friendly region. We've made some progress here. We're not waiting for a plan to get done. If there are things we can do right now, we're making sure that we're doing them, right? So we're going to talk about that. What existing resources, policies, and practice can we realign in the region to improve conditions? So sometimes this is not about new resources or new things. This is just about making sure that what we have is working in the best way possible. What new resources do we need to innovate, fill gaps, create systemic change? That's another thing we want to make sure goes into this plan. You're going to help us identify what those are. And what change do we need to collectively advocate for? Are we all saying the same message? Do we have what we need to actually do that? We want to make sure all of those things end up in our plan that we develop. So the elements of the plan are going to be the landscape that I talked about, that Jared's going to go into in much more depth. We want to identify what gaps does that leave, right? Where are we seeing that there is something that we need that isn't there? What are the things that are going really well in our region? Because we've been doing a lot of work, folks. A lot of us in this room have been working tirelessly over the last decade or more on trying to make sure that what we have is working well. And then what are the opportunities for us? How are we thinking differently and innovatively and creatively about what we can actually do differently, right? What are those opportunities? We have been in a state right now of like perpetual data gathering. So I wanted folks to be able to understand where a lot of the data you're going to see today is coming from. We have partnered with Stanford University around a rapid EC survey that reached 910 families across the region. And that helps us understand what their experiences are. Right? It was a rather comprehensive survey. All of that information is going to be available on our website. We won't be able to get into all of it tonight, but just know that it was a really, really great response. And Stanford was pleased with it, and it's telling us a lot about what the families are experiencing. We needed to hear from our child care business owners, and thanks to Liz Tobia, who's on our team, we were able to reach a lot. What was the number, Liz?
350.
Yeah, so half of the region's childcare owners responded to a survey that Liz sent out. That helps us understand what their experiences are, right? So we have some information around that. Our economic developers and municipal leaders have been engaged around assessing what their current practices are as it relates to supporting childcare businesses. We don't have enough of that information. That is a gap for us. We're going to continue to work on that over the course of this next year. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're digging in and we're trying to figure it out. This is new to a lot of these sectors. Before, all they've done is stand up and say childcare is a barrier to work, right? And then that's about where it ends. And they're not sure what they're supposed to do. So we really want to make sure that we're talking about that. Intermediaries are our community partners. We've surveyed our intermediaries. Those are people who support the folks who are doing the work of childcare. We wanted to know what are they doing with our childcare business owners specifically, and how do we understand what they need to do their work better. All right. So my mind was blown when I saw this stat. And so our average investment in children 0 to 5 in this country is $500 a year, compared to other countries where the average is $14,000 a year. This should be not only surprising, it should be appalling, right? I mean, we know that our best asset are our children. We know that learning begins at birth. We know all of these things, yet our investments are misaligned with what we know. And so we have to do better. So the US spent less on childcare than any other developed country. Demand for infant care, the costliest care with the lowest teacher ratios, remained high and spots were in short supply. We're going to dig a little bit into why that is. I do want to give credit to a lot of what you're going to see in these. If you see the similar graphics, they came from Rebecca Gale and Diane Kirsch. It was a document that was created just in the last couple months to help us understand how broke the childcare system is. So we're leaning on their work. So we know that people are struggling to find infant spots, especially, right? Like it's costly. It's really important for us to know that there is a reason that infant care is more expensive. They need more people, right? Infants need a lot of one-on-one attention. So it's staff intensive. You're gonna have a lot of people that have to watch a little kid, and you want that. But it does mean that fewer business owners, because the model is so hard, take infants, because they can make a lot more money with a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or school-age children. And so for my childcare business owners in the room, can you raise your hand if you're a childcare business owner? All right, so we've got a few. So you know this really well, right? Some people are having to make decisions based on, can I actually feed my family and afford my house? Not whether or not they just really they know that this care is needed, but it's not easy to actually do. So this impacts a lot of folks, right? And not just those. So where do we stand? Like locally, what does our supply look like? I'm going to turn it over. Yeah, Kathleen.
I'm curious, what does investment mean? Like 514,000. What is that picture look like?
We'll dig into that, and we'll make sure it's on the actual website with our follow-up materials. Thank you. If anybody else wants to add to that, I see Jim Hosma's in the room. I don't know if this public investment, so I'm assuming it's things that are coming through the government. Which I'm not going to ask you to answer that right now, Jim. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Okay, thank you. Perfect. All right, so we'll get an answer to that for you. And I don't know if I've got any backup to that particular data set from that article, but I'll get it. So I do want to dig into the data though. So I'm going to turn it over to Jared here, and he's going to go through. There's a lot of information here, so just know that we don't expect you to memorize it all, but we want you to take enough. Remember your worksheets, so that you're actually looking at it lens of what do I need to know so that I can actually figure out what my role is and what we need to do about this current state of childcare. All right, Jared, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Kathy. As Kathy said, my name is Jared Lutz. I have been helping the Pulse team with some of the data around the supply and demand, frankly, challenges that we have across the country in Michigan and in Southwest Michigan. As it relates to childcare. It's worth noting again, Kathy told me probably plan on 15, 20 minutes. If I'm gonna stick to that, you're gonna have to listen to me on 2.5 speed. So if I click through things too fast, if I talk too fast, please stop me. I would love to answer questions as we go through here. So to kind of contextualize at the national level on the front end here, it's a $122 billion issue that they've estimated. A majority of that comes from lost household income. When you can't work, you forego earnings, you have to reduce your hours, and as a result of that, businesses also lose $23 billion from hiring costs and reducing worker hours. The balance of that, as families earn less, as they are at home more, they have less income tax, and they're consuming less. So your sales and income tax also drop. And the data is there to back it up, right? 64% of national survey respondents have been late to work or left early as a result of childcare. Most concerning here on this chart on the left to me is 37% of respondents had their pay or their hours reduced by their employer as a result of childcare issues. And 23%, almost 1 in 4, have been let go or fired. So, you know, we talk about the fact that wages are going down as a result of having a kid. Why is that a problem? Well, because childcare is not affordable in the first place. The Department of Health and Human Safety really deems affordable childcare at or below spending 7% of your household income on childcare. 72% of families in the United States are paying more than 10% of their household income on childcare. And that is if we're talking about childcare in today's context. We'll get to this in a little bit, but childcare workers, they're not compensated very well. So if we were to talk and account for the living wages for early childhood education teachers, that gap grows dramatically from what folks can afford, what the state subsidy is. You can see here, to put an infant in a child care center, if we were to just standardize child care facilities and allow them to have a living wage, you'd be paying $11,500 out of pocket if you were eligible for the state subsidy and if you received all of that state subsidy. So how does that impact Michigan directly? You know, that $122 billion problem that we talked about on the first slide, it's a $3 billion problem in the state of Michigan. We talk about the trajectory of our kids and how we need to pump all these resources into K through 12. But at the end of the day, as Kathy mentioned, it really starts at birth and 0 to 5. This trajectory, if we are not having children age 3 and 4 in school, which a majority of them are not, if they do not have access to childcare, which almost a majority of them live in an area where they can't find access to childcare, it really sets them on a bad path for the rest of their life trajectory here. And almost a third of Michigan children do not have parents with secure employment. So, I'm going to ask a question here. Hopefully none of you saw that slide. So let's say there's 50,000 children in Southwest Michigan, age 0 to 5. Just rhetorical question, blurt it out if you'd like, percentage, number. How many people, or how many slots, childcare slots, do you think we would need to satisfy full demand for those 50,000 children? Wait until somebody says something. 50? 50? Yeah, I would agree, right? Because K through 12, we have a slot for every child, regardless of whether they take it, go to a private school, it doesn't really matter, but if you're born and you want to go to first grade, you get to go to first grade. That is not the case for our children age 0 to 5. We have a little bit more than 50,000 children age 0 to 5, but we only have capacity for 31,000 kids. And that is dramatically different based on where you live in the region. Cass County has only 1 slot for every 4.3 kids. Kalamazoo is the best, but they still only have 2 slots for every 3 kids. We haven't solved the problem even in our highest performing county. And this here is just representing that same figure in a different way. The inside, the middle ring there, that is how many kids age 0 to 5 reside in each county. And the outer ring shows you how many childcare slots there are. Again, just vice versa in Cass County, there's only seats for 23% of kids. Any questions so far before I start diving into county-specific data?
You said fast for Kalamazoo. Is there anything specifically that they may be doing?
That's a great question. Kathy, do
We're
you?
gonna dig into that. So put that on your little worksheets. I think those are the things we're gonna want.
Well, one of the other things is there actually may be a bigger deficit in Kalamazoo because a lot of the outlying counties, their kiddos are coming with them to work in Kalamazoo and they have childcare. I just had a talk with somebody today where they live in Van Buren County and their childcare and their employer is in Kalamazoo.
What a beautiful segue into our next slide. Yeah, remind me to give you your $5 bill. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this slide, but on the bottom right, all that is a heat density map of where jobs are located in Kalamazoo County. And then the larger map in the middle here is a heat map of all the child care facilities in Kalamazoo County. So to your point, we actually kind of like this distribution. We'll see some other counties that it doesn't quite look like this. There's 278 facilities in Kalamazoo County, and they relatively well line up with where all of the jobs are. At the end of the day, you want childcare either walkable or close to where you live or where you work. 41% of survey respondents from our Stanford poll said that they would prefer to get to childcare, get their children to childcare by walking, whether it's walking from work or walking from their house. But not many folks live in walking distance from a childcare facility. On the left here is a graph. You'll see this for all counties. This just represents the percentage of household income spent on childcare in the county. So again, we have more than half of people, again, survey respondents, paying more than 10% of your household income in Kalamazoo County. And another interesting statistic, you'll see this in the same spot again for all the counties, 18% of respondents had difficulty finding a provider that accepts their state subsidy. That's a huge issue when we talk about affordability. If you can't find a provider that will accept that subsidy, you're out of luck at the end of the day because there's such high demand, small supply, that they can turn you away. St. Joe, same thing. But here you can see the childcare facility distribution. It vaguely does resemble that of job density, but sparsely, right? 57 facilities for, the over 60,000 folks who live there. Distribution is just not quite adequate. And St. Joe County actually performed the best out of all 7 counties on respondents who had difficulty finding care. But still 15% of them could not find a provider. Yeah, best isn't good, but it is the best. So kudos, kudos where actually St. Joe County also performed best on, no, I'm sorry, there's the least first. Sorry, everybody. Cass County, unfortunately, we came to the worst for difficulty of finding a provider who accepts that state subsidy, 1 in 3. I wanted to talk about this a couple slides ago, but 62% of our Stanford survey respondents said they experienced a material hardship in the last month. 53% of respondents said they actually had a decrease in family income over the last month. So a lot of us sit here in our, stable salary jobs where things are relatively stable. That's not the case for more than half of our survey respondents that responded to our poll here. And just a quick tangent, when you strike that material hardship by race, it gets far worse. You have the Latinx community responding 93% that had a material hardship in the last month. 92% of Black respondents had a material hardship in the last month. So when you're already spending more than 10% of your household income on childcare, and 1 in 3 can't find a provider for a subsidy, it just propagates this issue. Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm saying from the number of licensed facilities, because at work and families in need, you're gonna see a far smaller number of
That's a fantastic point. And this heat map here in the center, that's also licensed at-home facilities. You might have a house we're not talking about, the Young Five school that's on your main corridor. We don't have 35 of those. We might have 30 houses that have 2, maybe 3 slots that are a licensed facility. So yes, exactly. Thank you.
I do think though that's a really important point for us to make sure we put in the plan, and that we're looking at this data and creating maps that show that, because for those of you who aren't aware, if you're in a GS wraparound care, and that burden falls on other child care providers. So, Stephanie, yes.
So you've taken the GSRPs and Head Starts off of this map that's not reflected?
This should just be as child care. This is not.
So this
if you
is
just
centers,
do
home,
GSRP,
and homes.
Yes, yes.
I think that this matches licensed facilities.
Yeah, which would be
includes Head Start
GSRP.
and GSRP.
Yes.
So, Cass County is one of my counties, so I know for sure that if you, actually take Head Start and GSRP off, it's more than
I agree.
Okay,
this
so
is
these
really-
are half-day or not half-day, but school day programs are still included in these maps.
Aggregating it by that's gonna be important when we submit the plan. So thank you for that. So we'll take a look at that.
And this is part of a broader, those center maps here are part of a broader interactive map that have head count or total number of seats, when they're open. It's some pretty interesting data that you can kind of pick through. I'll make sure Kathy has that link should anybody be interested. Van Buren, continuing through, we have a couple more counties to get through. 86 facilities. Right here, you see in the center of the county, if there aren't slots in those 3, maybe childcare facilities that are in the center of the county, you have to drive quite a ways from your home or from your workplace in order to get to a facility that has care. Interestingly enough, in Van Buren County, 48%, that's the only county that was under 50% of respondents spending more than 10% of household income on childcare. But if you look at those spending 30% or more, everybody kind of has this nice parabolic shape on those 5 charts. There's a big spike on those spending more than 30% of their household income on childcare. Berrien County, the opposite, 60% spend more than 10% of household income on childcare. Again, just to remind you, Department of Health and Human Services say 7% or less is deemed affordable. It's not affordable to the vast majority of people who are in childcare in Southwest Michigan. Calhoun County, again, most of the jobs here are clustered in Battle Creek. That makes sense. And it makes sense that most of our childcare facilities are clustered in Battle Creek. But if you cut that map in half, you again only have about 6 childcare facilities serving the entire southern section of that county. Again, 41% of respondents say their preferred method to get to a childcare facility is by walking either from work or from their home. Most of these folks cannot. And I believe last, but certainly not least, Branch County, with 43 facilities, have the exact same thing. Coldwater, Bangor, it makes sense. That's where your population clusters are, but there are just massive pockets of childcare deserts where families cannot be served to the degree that they need to be. So all these facilities that we just talked about, that's everything, as we mentioned. That's at-home facilities with 2-3 slots. That's your Head Start programs. That's your true big facilities with multiple slots, open anytime. This slide here shows you what facilities are open in the evening and what facilities are open at night. And that drops the numbers dramatically. Only 5% of facilities are open on Saturday, and only 7% of facilities are open on Sunday. Yet, we estimate that there's probably 63,000 workers who work on the evenings, nights, or split shift, rotating shift, on a national survey set, so we don't know this number for Southwest Michigan. 1 in 5 workers don't know their schedule until less than a week in advance. So how are we supposed to plan care for our children when we're only operating with 5% of facilities that might be open that day, and then you have to go and try to get a slot 5 days in advance? You'll see this slide a couple of times. This is just a question and answer slide, but figured we'd give me and Kathy a break if there are any more questions. Yes, please.
So the 2 counties that you said where people were paying more than 30%.
Let's click back through.
I'm just wondering if there's in those counties.
Oh, very good, interesting. So Kalamazoo, we have 12% spending, oh, I'm sorry if I'm walking in front of that, 12% spending more than 30% of their income. St. Joe is also 12, Cass County is 15, and Van Buren, that's our high one.
Van Buren and Berrien, I think it was.
And Berrien's 12, and Calhoun's 13. Branch is 13, yeah.
I think those layers are important. That perspective is really important. Like if we try to understand what is our workforce in these spaces and who's struggling most, not only to find it, but to afford it, that's gonna be really important information for us to be thinking about when it comes to supply building, right? What does the supply building in that area need to look like to meet the actual demand?
Absolutely, and then that also will affect the areas that we want to reduce some of those deserts that we've discussed.
I guess I'm wondering, does any of this data take into account these facilities that do or do not have qualified to handle children with mental health challenges?
That's a great question. It does not. So I don't believe, does the state publish data on that?
April, do you know if we have that data?
No.
They do not.
They do not publish data on that.
So what's important for this, and we're gonna capture this, is as we're putting together this plan, those gaps are things that we want the state to know, right? So what are the things that families need to know? If I have a child that has special needs and I'm looking for care, that greatly diminishes my access, right? And so that's another layer that we're gonna wanna make sure that we lift up. Thank you for that.
And it's not just, I'm sorry, 1 second. It's not, you are right, but there are even, in our survey respondents, we didn't ask that question specifically with the Stanford data, but we did ask how many folks have children who have reported behavioral difficulty, whether that be aggression, depression. It was in the 80s, I wish I remembered the number off the top of my head, but it was over 80% of parents said yes to that question. And there's a very interesting analog between, if you strike that by county and then by income. When you look at it by county, the lines of the graph are almost identical with the access to care. It's very interesting. Yes, please. That's a great question. We do not have that slide. We might have some pieces of data that could point us in the right direction based on our survey that went out to childcare facilities, but I do not have that data set, no.
So later, we will have a slide that talks about capacity and staffing challenges because of that survey that we talked to you about that Liz had conducted with our 300 and some providers. We have some level of data. The reporting structure at the state, and April can speak to this, April Goodwin from Child Care Resources, a little better than we can, and we'll make sure that you get connected with her if you have specific questions, is a little lacking in a lot of the areas. And it's not only because of the system itself, it's because how we expect people to report, and that this is a dynamic flow of information that has to happen. So it needs to be better. I think everybody acknowledges that. I think what the better is what we want to make sure goes into this plan.
And at a broader level, I'll quit burying the lead here a little bit. We'll get into this. The wages that childcare workers are paid is completely insufficient for us to be able to find the workforce to staff these facilities, to get kids in seats. We have a couple of slides on that later, so stay tuned.
So I just close by 6 o'clock. That becomes an issue with parents who have to work after 6.
Right. To be honest, these are buckets that came from the state of Michigan. They just tell us when they are, whether they're open during the day, evening, night, split shift. Those are the 4 categories. How they define that, we'll look into that.
Since I can't get around to everybody who has a question, if you could speak loud enough so everybody in the room could hear you, that'd be really helpful. Michael.
I know it's not ideal, but have you also tried to quantify the sites that are informal and unlicensed that with some support could actually rise to the level of quality, or are they totally invisible from this?
So that's a tough one, right, to quantify. I know that there are attempts at looking at family friend neighbor care, otherwise known as FFN, and there are also license exempt providers that we do have numbers for. So those are folks who are receiving subsidies. They are not licensed, but they are in the system in some way. And so, am I explaining that correctly, April? Yes. Thank you. I wanted to make sure I didn't misspeak. But so this is why this is a wicked problem. It's hard to get our arms around because it's a very, very, in many ways and in many communities can be a very organic process. It's my neighbor's watching my kid on Tuesdays and my grandma watches him on Fridays and then I do, and that is really hard for us to capture. People are piecing it together and figuring it out. Many people are. Is it the ideal situation? I think most people across the board are saying no. And so you'll see a quote later in the slides from a woman who said that her 88-year-old mother-in-law has been watching her 3-year-old, so she had to cut her hours because the 88-year-old can't keep up with the 3-year-old. I'm 54, I couldn't keep up with the 3-year-old. There's a lot of, limitations on what we're experiencing. All right, so you're gonna have a lot of questions. I do, on the I wonder, I liked, and I wished, make sure that you're going to that site and putting this stuff in there because that's how we're gonna capture this information, please. All right, thank you, Jared. And I realize I've been pronouncing your last name wrong this whole entire time, so thank you for saying it out loud. Lutz. You can call me Sazenda, just for fun. Everybody else does. So a reminder that you can, again, be taking notes on your worksheet and using that QR code. We want to hear from you. So can we all agree that in 2018, not a single person got the answer correct to where do you see yourself in 5 years? Did you expect to see yourself here in 5 years in this room talking about childcare? For many of you, you probably don't see yourself in that space at all. I can tell you that when we started these conversations with economic developers and others, I'm going to share a little story about that in a minute. People are like, I don't do childcare. Well, I know you don't do childcare, but you still have a role to play, right? So I am a former city commissioner in the city of Battle Creek. And when we were going through a priority-based budgeting process, I asked that childcare businesses be named explicitly in the small business development part of our priority-based budgeting. And the immediate reaction from commissioners as well as from city staff that were there, I think it was the attorney that said, we don't do childcare. Liability that's really scary stuff. And I said, I don't suggest that you do childcare. I'm not asking the city of Battle Creek to open a childcare center. I am asking that we prioritize our support, that we provide people who want to do childcare, just like you would with any other business, right? The answer I got was that they are all welcome to come to us. Well, what we know, especially about childcare business owners, is they do not see themselves in that light. They don't know those resources exist. It is on us in the system we have to make the changes to make sure that it's accessible and it's explicit. So I managed to get it included, explicitly named in the priority-based budgeting process, which was a big win for childcare, right? Those are the kind of changes that we can make, and you're gonna hear more about what the city of Battle Creek has done. But we need to make sure that we help you see, and we provide you with the tools you need to be an active player in actually solving this childcare crisis. So this is March of 2020. Let's do a little walk down memory lane. This was BC, before COVID, right? Then it hit. And everybody's worlds turned upside down. And you had families with young children, child care centers were closed. They were still expected to work remotely, many of them, those who could. And they were caring for children who were trying to do school online, right? Babies just crawling around, picking stuff up off the ground. You've got things were just incredibly tough for everybody. But what it did do for us is it illuminated the problem, right? Finally, people were paying attention. Those of us who have been screaming from the rooftops for so long about the fact that we all needed to pay attention to this crisis, they were finally like, oh, this is what you're talking about, right? And sadly, during that process, women bore the brunt of unemployment. They were the ones that were leaving the workforce in droves, right? Because somebody had to care for the children. And who predominantly takes that burden on are women. So you have employers who are saying, how am I going to replace this person? I don't know how many conversations I've had about the cost of actually replacing people, right? The family who's now struggling with, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to survive this? So nobody was winning, right? And 2 years post-pandemic, almost 2 million, what they've added now, 2 million folks have left their jobs due to what was going on during COVID and especially around childcare. So it turns out that childcare is an economic issue. We need to be thinking about it in that way. It is a foundation like the roads that you drive on that allow people to get to the things they need to do so that we can actually have a thriving economy. And we have to be thinking about it in that way. We have to change our mindsets around it. There has been a lot of mindset challenges across all sectors about the role of childcare, who's responsible for doing it, what they deserve to make, and all of that is going to have to change. We have to get all of that written into this plan. To our star in the room, Tanika. Woot woot. I'm going to give her all the posters of her face, and she's going to plaster her daughter Nina's room with them so that she can see her and she can tell her, Mommy's always watching you. Tanika has been incredibly helpful in sharing her story with us about what she has experienced. And how old is Nina now?
Just turned 8 years.
Oh my, happy birthday, Nina. So I knew Tanika when she was pregnant with Nina. And she was working at a local organization in Battle Creek, and she crunched the numbers. She was like, I can't stay in this job and have a baby. It is absolutely impossible. And so she asked for a raise, did not receive one, so she had to leave work. She, thankfully, is an incredibly resilient and resourceful person and put herself to work. But what does that mean when you put yourself to work outside of the workforce and you're self-employed? You have no benefits, you have no retirement, you have no consistent income. She made sure that her daughter was taken care of and was getting health insurance, but when I asked her about hers, she said, oh, I just don't go to the doctor. People are making decisions all the time that have long-term effects, but you do what you have to do in the moment, right? And so we have to, this is urgent, it is beyond urgent. We have to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to change that dynamic so another person doesn't have to make that decision, right? And it's within our grasp. So we've got our employer there scratching his head, what happened to childcare, right? And they want to know why it's so expensive and who knew our economy needs it to function. We had 47 million workers quit their jobs during the Great Resignation. Everybody remembered that whole thing, right? People were leaving their jobs. But childcare became a front and center issue. You could open a paper, for people who still do that. You could open your phone and you would see lots of articles that were talking about childcare finally. People trying to really dig into understanding what the issue was. A big part of this that came up, and there might be somebody in the room who asked me this question at a presentation. Hey, I pay a lot of money for childcare. I don't understand why these childcare professionals don't make a ton of money. Based on what I pay, it feels like they should be really, really just rolling in the dough. And after I got done laughing, I helped them understand, not rudely, but just, like, oh, it's wonderful, right? One of those persons that did not laugh but took it seriously was Andy Richards, and he's in the room right now. And I just want to lift up that Duncan Aviation leaned in and said, this is a real problem. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We want to do something about it. He was actually shocked at the shortfall that we have in care. He wasn't aware, and he's doesn't have children right now, but he has a workforce that he's trying to support, and he wanted to make sure that they were part of the solution and not just part of the problem that they were contributing to, right? So back to that question of cost of care. When I tell people that 83% of your tuition that you pay goes towards staffing, many people are amazed. And this isn't people making $12 an hour, many of the childcare workers, right? This is not a livable wage. This is not something that is overly exorbitant. This is a real challenge. 4% go toward the food, equipment, supplies, activities, and 13% towards their facilities, their insurance, and other fees. I've never owned a business, but if I were trying to start a business, this would not be one that I would be attracted to. This is not something, those margins are so slim. In our champions group, actually we have a group in Battle Creek that we call our childcare champions, and we have almost 5 employers who are really deeply engaged with us in working on this issue. And there was an assumption that maybe these people who run childcares really just don't know how to run a business, right? And not in a derogatory way. There wasn't any criticism. It was just, is that possible? Maybe these are people who just started caring for kids and they don't really understand all that stuff. That's just not true, right? And we helped them see that. And the person who said that is not in this room, by the way. Don't want anybody to come up to Andy and say, what? But we have to do a better job of helping people understand the business model itself and how broken it is. Again, there's no market solution to this. Without public investment, we are not going to be able to fix this challenge. Let's look at the other thing. Where does money come from for a childcare business owner? Many of you in this room know this really well, right? Roughly 93% come from the money that families can pay you or those subsidies. We already know that we have a lack of providers who accept subsidies. We're going to dig in a little bit later about why that is, but just a little placeholder for you since I'm mentioning it, is that it is not an easy system to navigate. There are delays, there are challenges. We have to fix that system as well, right? We need to be looking at what we can do to make subsidies more accessible, not just for families, but for providers, because right now it's a pretty broken system. And the risk, right, is that if I'm Jim Hodsma sitting in Lansing and I'm looking at the budget and we only use 33% of those childcare subsidy dollars, I'm saying, well, we must not need it, right? There is a risk that it's going back in that pot and it's going to go to something else. We have to do everything we can to make sure that we're actually tapping into that. So the state subsidy for childcare is designed to benefit both families and providers, yet only half of eligible families sign up for it. I think it's actually less than that. That feels like it's a very generous number, Liz. And only half of childcare providers accept it. We saw actually numbers that were even worse than that when we were looking at those slides. Again, we are not pointing fingers at childcare providers who refuse to accept subsidies. We have to look at the system and why they're not accepting them. And we have to fix that system. So usage. For families, it makes it more affordable, right? But the burden is that they have to find a provider. We already know how challenging that is. The process to sign up for it is arduous. There have been improvements, don't get me wrong. Over the course of this last decade, there have been changes. It used to be that whenever you had a change in your income or your job status, you'd have to get recertified. Now you only have to be certified once a year. That is improvement, right? So there is, if you are looking for a job and you apply for a subsidy and you are eligible, you don't have to reapply again for another year. That gives you at least a little bit of a buffer, right? There's stigma associated with this. We hear this from families all the time. I don't want a handout from the government. What if we were to reposition what we call these things, right, as a support for families? The provider, it assures enrollment for children that they may not otherwise be able to reach, people who are actually in need of this care in desperate ways. But the subsidy amounts don't always cover the entire cost of care. Not almost, I mean, they just don't, right? The process for receiving reimbursement is tedious and time-consuming. And for my providers in the room, you can attest to this, I'm sure, right? With less competition from other providers, there's already an abundance of families waiting. So why would they do it if they don't have to? If they could get a full-pay family coming in and they don't have to deal with that system, what is the incentive for them to actually participate? That's a real challenge. So how could it ease the crisis? We could eliminate the stigma by giving subsidies to all families. right? Like, we can think about this. Canada's doing that right now. They're saying, they've made a commitment right now that families will never pay more than $10 a day for care. And they are subsidizing it. I know, Liz is laughing. She's like, oh my God, could you imagine? Right? Remove application barriers by using income tax returns. Like, there are other ways we collect data. If our systems at the state would talk to each other, there are ways for us to figure this out that would not be as arduous on families. For providers, we have to distribute the subsidy to providers based on enrollment and program offerings, not just on, what is it right now, where it's about it's attendance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Simplify the reimbursement claim process by verifying child's enrollment instead of entering each child's daily times in and out. So I don't know about you, but that would be a pretty tedious process, right? So there are ways we can start incorporating these asks into the plan. If you have other ideas, please make sure that you get them to us, right? And when you talk to your facilitators later, make sure that comes up. So without public investment in childcare, job quality is poor. So it's not just that it's all the other things that I talked about, but the job quality is very poor because people aren't making enough money doing this work, right? This is not about their quality of work. This is about the quality of their experience as a worker. And when people are making $12 to $14 an hour, I don't know about any of you, but that would be a really, really tough thing to do. And it shouldn't be a labor of love. Oh, you do this because it's the good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. People deserve to eat and to be able to live and thrive in ways that, especially the ones that are doing this work that's so important. You've got a worker here represented. I can't make a living on $12 an hour, but I love what I do and the parents can't afford more. We can't charge more to families because they can't afford it, but we've got to increase wages. Where does that leave us? Say it with me. Public investment. Thank you. All right. Child care workers themselves, the actual industry lost about 100,000 workers, and they're still trying to recover, to the point where we need to identify how many of our providers are working at lower capacity because they don't have enough staff. It's a lot. So for those of you who work in any other industry, you know that there are workforce challenges everywhere. Child care is not unique to that. Part of the challenge is that we don't view childcare as an industry. We see it as a service, we see it as something else, a family support. Until we start viewing it as an industry, until we start organizing ourselves around it in that way, we're going to continue to fight this battle. Yeah, just stop so I can breathe and ask if there's any questions about any of that. Yes.
Well, we haven't even talked about the quality of what's going on.
Right.
And that's a huge shift because we used to, the push was quality. It was quality, it was quality, it was accreditation. And now it's just, we just need numbers. Like, you don't even care, exactly, we don't even care. We've got a body there, and that's not very fair.
That is a really, really good point. This work is so critically important, and I have been in rooms with child care workers who will tell me, I could go to Arby's tomorrow and make more money, and it's a lot less burden. I'm not taking home worries about the children that I'm caring for. I'm not having to go to professional development that's expected of me, and I may or may not get paid for that. There are all of these things that are expected of these folks, and there is just a complete misalignment with the way they are compensated. We can't even get to quality until we address that, right? We really need to make sure that we're working simultaneously to build quality and quantity, and that's really hard to do in the current environment with how they're paid. Any other questions? Because we're going to get into the child care workforce now. Yes? No? Oh, okay. All right, the child care workforce. We know that it's built on a foundation of sand right now, and this is not good. We need some firmer footing for all of it. I'm going to turn it over to Jared to talk about this beautiful slide that makes me want to be a cardiologist.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, everybody. Back to your question, I did want to mention, Kathy talked about the wage side. As income increases from our Stanford survey, the percentage of your household income spent on childcare also increases. If you're making $250,000 a year and you're capable of pumping $50,000 a year into your kids, you're going to do it. But we talk about this even playing field. That even playing field doesn't start, or the playing field becomes uneven, not in kindergarten when you're 0. If the resources are that vastly skewed. So to the workforce issue, if you were to tell me, as a high school graduate, as a early childhood education degree holder, that I would have to go through all this continuing education, these background checks, the responsibility requirements that Kathy talked about, and I was going to get paid under $30,000 a year. I would also go work at Arby's. It does not make sense at the current rate childcare workers are being paid. They're really only about $2,000 a year off of the Michigan poverty line for one person. The national average occupation for all occupations is $62,000 a year. That's well over double what childcare workers across the country are being paid. Only 2% of occupations are paid less than childcare workers. As you can see, one of them, there's only like 5. One of them is a fast food cook. So that is the societal value that we're placing on these individuals as based on their wages. So it's no wonder then, again, Kathy mentioned this, it's no wonder why 10% of childcare workers never returned to the sector after the pandemic. We had 1.1 million individuals pre-pandemic who were working in the childcare sector. That dropped to 667,000 in April of 2020, and we're still not back. So every other industry, they've recovered to their pre-COVID levels. They've gained a couple percentage points. Everybody, you normally guess a percentage or two increase every year. We're still behind where we were in 2020. And there's a reason for it. Almost 1 in 3 childcare workers experience food insecurity. More than half of them are enrolled in at least one public benefit program, whether it's Medicaid, SNAP, EITC, you name it.
No, I'll do it, okay, all right. So this information is actually coming from the survey that we talked to you about that Liz conducted with our childcare business owners, and 44% of them reported having current staffing needs. So it's almost half, saying I am not fully staffed, I need people, right? Most of the need is in centers, followed by group homes, and the need is lower in family homes. Now, this is just a question for us to noodle on. What would our target be around home providers? We know that there are a lot of folks who prefer home providers for especially infants and toddlers. The younger they are, the more that's appealing. So how do we even know how much we need to build, and what system do we have to actually build that home provider base? So this is something we need to be thinking about continually. We don't have an answer for right now. If you do, please come see me later. But we do want to make sure that we're not omitting them from this discussion, because they play a really critical role. And we never want to, I've had this conversation with our child care champions a lot. You never want to take away family choice when it comes to this. You don't want to mandate a particular type of care. You want to make sure that all types are available, but you really want to leave it to the families to make sure that they have the best choice that aligns with what their needs are as a family. Yes?
So I work with families that have mental health challenges. They're part of the local community mental health system, and we have a process respite. But what we're finding is that family members who may want to be a part of that process is cumbersome, and if they have a kiddo at home and they are respite approved with training and by the state, if that kiddo harms them, who's the liability of that? So we find that in a lot of family home providers, that also is that gap of wanting to be licensed, because it brings bigger challenges. Instead of saying, hey, the grandma of the neighborhood watches 5 kiddos, and there's no expectation that if the kiddo gets hurt being a kid, that they're going to be sued. But then that other side of that is, as soon as you start having the government involved and licensing boards involved, that liability starts falling on those family members in the community who are trying to help.
That's a really good point, and I think something we want to make sure gets captured in this plan, right? Like, we need to layer this from the experiences of people who have them. And for those of you who may not have heard all of that, this idea that many people are opposed to or resistant to getting into the system of childcare because it opens them up for liability. And until we really look at what we're doing to provide a safe place for people to provide care where they have some sort of coverage, we're going to continue to have that problem. Thank you for pointing that out. So we know that 79% of our childcare businesses in this region are not aware of community business supports. So I talked about that when I talked about, the city of Battle Creek now explicitly naming childcare businesses as a target audience for them with small business development. These folks need the same and are worthy of the same support other businesses who are getting started receive. So we have to change that system. We need to really look internally. If I'm an economic developer, if I run a small business development office through my city, I need to be looking at my practices and saying, what am I doing to explicitly help these folks? Right? Childcare businesses are also not connected to local chambers of commerce, EDOs, or other intermediaries who provide business supports and opportunities. We've got some suggestions of ways we could change that, but we need to be aware of that. When you're thinking about your audience and who you're engaging, are you actually being explicit around including and being very targeted around childcare business owners? So, how can childcare providers get more of the support they need? Well, we know many of us in this room do a great job networking. Our networks are pretty vast. We get invited to tables and to boards and to places where we actually have access to people who have power and decision-making authority. We need to start opening up our borders on those boards and on our service clubs and all of those things to be more inclusive of childcare business owners. When they can be connected, that is helpful. Yeah, Sherry.
And they work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Exactly.
And
Yes, that is a challenge, right? Is that we just had this conversation earlier before the presentation started. Is like people say, well, I can't engage childcare providers because they're always providing care to children, right? So when do I engage them? I don't. It just is going to look different, right? So how could you do a board meeting that has a virtual or a hybrid aspect and somebody can do it over their lunch? I mean, let's accommodate a bit. Let's get creative about how we do it. Maybe it's not a meeting that's every month. Maybe it's once a quarter, and it's something that they can work around, right? So I don't want to limit our thinking of what's possible based on some of the challenges, because those are going to exist. And the best people to answer that are the childcare business owners themselves. How do they want to be engaged? What would it look like to be engaged? And when we can do that, and I know we've got several, and hey Sarah, several in the audience who could help us understand what it is they need. Sarah and I met a few months ago and talked about her desire as a home provider to be connected to other home providers, because it's a pretty isolating job when you're a home provider, right? You're with kids all day, you see the families when they drop them off, but this idea of being able to be connected to your peers is something that doesn't happen very often. So how can local businesses learn more about and engage with childcare businesses? This is something we want to really actually start working on, right? How can we actually start chipping away at that? And if we had more time, I'm looking at that it's already after 6 o'clock, so I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker. So this talks about what are we doing currently. I talked about us being able to identify what are we doing now to improve conditions. And thankfully, we are doing a lot to try and build our workforce. I saw Lisa Farrell walk in. Lisa? Okay, and we've got the folks from the Edison Project over here. We're going to talk about some of these projects that are working specifically to try and build our supply of childcare workers, right? And they're trying to take down all the barriers that are there and go into places where people may not have seen themselves in this work, but they are trained to do that then, right? A lot of these earn and learn programs where you can be learning while you're earning, and this is a great way for us to think about it. In Calhoun County, we have our Early Childhood Education Collective. We have 180 people in the program for Calhoun County. Those are people who are working through this pathway, this pipeline to get into the work and get the certifications they need to actually do it. This is a great opportunity, and it's not possible without partners. That is a collaborative that you'll see all of our partners here that are working on that. We meet monthly to talk about progress, identify barriers, figure out what we need to do, and advocate collectively to try and increase those wages when and where we can. Right, we've got our Kalamazoo folks. Let's hear it from you. Got a whole table there. Yeah, all right. I was just at their meeting a couple weeks ago. This work is deeply neighborhood based, right? They're saying we're going to go door to door, we're going to knock on the doors, we're going to talk to people who haven't seen themselves in this space, and we're going to give them every opportunity to try and do that work if they choose to. We're going to try and remove all those barriers. They provide a lot of wraparound support to those folks because we know, and Lisa does this as well at the program in Calhoun County, what we know is that just having opportunity to learn is not their only barrier. They're struggling with housing, they're struggling with finding care for their own children, they are struggling with a lot of things that they need support for. So when you're thinking about doing this work, you are not just supporting somebody to get on a trajectory to get a job, you are supporting them holistically to try and think about what it is that they need in their lives so that they can thrive. So there's another thing going on nationally that I really want to mention, and for my partners in the room that are part of this project, the Department of Labor has its first ever Job Quality Academy. We were awarded one of 16 grants to participate. Was it 16 or 15? 16. Where we are traveling to DC twice this year. We just got back a couple weeks ago, where we are talking about what are our efforts to try and improve job quality. We are focused specifically and explicitly on childcare workers. So our goal there is to bring attention to the quality of jobs that are within the childcare industry, and then build a broad-based coalition of folks who will work to try and improve that. Our focus, our priorities, now I think there's a list of 8 elements of what makes a job quality. We are focused on our project specifically around DEI and A, as well as empowerment and representation. We want to make sure that childcare workers have a voice, right? That they actually have a way to actually share what they need and want. And then, of course, on pay and benefits, right? If we do not address the compensation issue, the other stuff just feels like icing on a piece of poop. I don't know. It's just not what we want, right? Sorry for the crassness, but there's no other way to put it. And it got a reaction out of you, and you'll remember it. So what we're going to do is build a cross-sector coalition that is really focused on making sure that we're improving the quality of the jobs that these folks are having. One person on one of the panels that I just want to lift up that was really, I think it was an aha for me. They're like, when we in workforce development are only focused on making sure that we're getting the person to that next good job, we are forgetting or not doing a good enough job of saying the job that they just left also has to be good in quality. Because somebody's going to be coming in behind them and getting in that job. How are we ensuring that every job is a quality job? We can do that. We've got it within our grasp. We just have to do it. So we have to act. We have to do all the things we're talking about right now, and we have to collectively advocate our tushies off, right? We have got to be talking with the same language, to the same people, over and over and over again to build the public and political will it's going to take to actually change this experience that people are having. And so we want to make sure that we are organized in a way after this year that allows you, in whatever position you sit in, whatever sector you're in, that you have the tools you need to do just that. You are sitting at tables that we're not at. So our Battle Creek Childcare Champions actually wrote a letter to our legislature that was really calling out, hey, we as CEOs and who are responsible for a huge number of employees demand that the state do better around childcare. This is abysmal, it needs to change. And it got picked up by Cranes Detroit. That was a way for them to actually work on, A, understanding the issues, but also put themselves out there in a way that's helping us advocate. And when we all are talking about it, not just those of us in early childhood, it's going to get noticed, it's going to get attention, and that's what we're going to need. There was a moment, do you remember those of us on that call, where we really celebrated? We were so excited when Build Back Better was announced, and we were peeling through all of the details, and we're like, yes, we're finally getting the recognition and the supports and the investments that we're going to need. And no, not so quick. It did not happen. So we had partisan gridlock, there was lots of stuff, it just didn't happen, right? So we were back to, okay, what can we do? So we don't want to let this stop us. It was definitely a temporary defeat, but there is some hope, and we're going to talk about that. You've got parents still screaming for help, right? Like, we can all figure out in these boardrooms and in these, capitals what needs to happen. And meanwhile, people are really, really struggling. Children aren't getting what they need. Families can't work. All of the things that we know about, right? The U.S. child care system isn't working for anyone, and without sustained federal investment, it will remain broken. And if I sound like a broken record, it's because I am. We need to keep saying this over and over again. So we know that children's earliest experiences have far-reaching impacts. Children who live, and I think you mentioned this, Jared, children who live in childcare deserts with economically vulnerable families struggle the most with their behaviors. This is an impact we're having in the classrooms. If you talk to any childcare professional, they'll tell you about post-pandemic, what is going on in these classrooms. It's creating and necessitating a different type of support for these children. that they're having to adapt and adjust to actually meet those needs. And that's just, so now we're adding another burden on these professionals who are already underpaid to now be able to handle things that are really difficult and challenging. So what did the families tell us? And what do they want our elected officials and policymakers to know? So in St. Joe, we heard from a family that said there's not enough options for quality childcare in Southwest Michigan that are affordable and safe. Parents have to work to provide for the family, and childcare should be not cost prohibitive so that families can have peace of mind. Right? What we know is when people have good care, they can actually be fully present for you as employees. If they are worried constantly about how their children are doing, they are not fully present. They cannot be the employee you need them to be. Somebody in Paw Paw said we need incentives for daycares, programs, pay for childcare workers, so they named it themselves. We need food programs and insurance. This is something that when people are finding out what's going on with families and what experiences they have, or for childcare professionals, they are really appalled. Many of them know it pretty well. This family in Battle Creek, although our family's privileged with decent jobs, we do not have the extra income to afford full-time care in this area. It's $900 a month. Right? My husband and I both have student loans. We've been negatively impacted by inflation. They suggest that they're not alone in that. They get that, but it's a real problem, right? Complicated ratios for daycares make them difficult to staff because of the daycare shortage. When a family doesn't have daycare, it forces parents to stay home and it makes life difficult. For the record, we try and avoid the word daycare. It's childcare, but these are quotes. So people who do this work do not care for days, they care for children. So if you want to remember that way, so you can reframe your own thinking around it, that's a good thing for us to do. So this is not a picture of the actual 88-year-old watching the 3-year-old, but when you Google it, this is what you get. Because the 88-year-old watching a 3-year-old doesn't even take a picture because she's too tired. So we need to make sure that we are listening to our families and making sure that people are not having to make these decisions. This woman deserves to rest, right? She deserves to have that grandbaby, great-grandbaby come over, sit on her knee a little bit, and then somebody take them away. No 88-year-old should have to be responsible for a full-time childcare gig. So thankfully, Michigan is stepping up. We are doing a lot in this state, right? And we need to recognize that. We have Caring for My Future, which is a way of really trying to build a supply across the board. Now, I will tell you it's woefully inadequate. It is something, but it is not enough. And it is also very challenging. I know that I'm helping somebody in this room right now try and start a childcare business, and she's trying to navigate all of this. And it is barrier after barrier after barrier. We have to make sure in our plan we are talking about what those barriers are very explicitly so that people can work on fixing them and that we hold the state accountable for where those things are that are not working. All right, so how do we fix it? We have to make sure parents can afford it, teachers make a living wage, and that kids have more options, right? We know those things. Those are pretty given. So how we do it is, again, say it with me. Public investment. Okay, all right. So the other thing to know is that while we're doing that and trying to get public investment, which is a long-term goal that we're going to have to work really hard on, we have to remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for. We all have power, we all have influence, we all have things we can do immediately, and we want to make sure that you have the tools you need to do that. So everyone has a role to play. We're going to help you find yours. I'm hoping you see yourself in maybe 1, 2, or 3 of these. These are all folks that need to play a role, and we're going to make sure that you have what you need to do that. So for those of you who don't know, Pulse developed something called the Pulse Roadmap last year that was meant to really help our employers understand how they navigate the opportunities for them to support their workforce around childcare. We are now building out one for economic developers and municipal leaders. I'd love to have one for elected officials, but that is right now still a dream. That's why it says it's tentative. The other 2 we can do tomorrow, right? We can make sure that you have the tools you need, but that tool alone is not going to change your mindset about what you need to do to help build the supply of childcare. That's got to come internally. And so we want to make sure that you have opportunities to learn. How many economic developers do we have in the room? Is it okay? All right, we've got some folks here. We want you to take this to heart, right? There's a lot you can do. We have an assessment that you can complete that helps you really understand what your current practices and policies are and how you can actually shift those. Same with our municipal leaders. So we're going to talk about a couple of those right now. The roadmap for municipalities is here. I'm not going to go through all of them because we don't have time, but you will see them in the slide deck. I want to call out, though, Battle Creek again. They have a special place in my heart. I was a commissioner. I've lived there for 30 years, so I just wanted to lift them up right now. When I asked Marcy, thank you Marcy, she's in the room right here, one of our steering committee members, She completed the assessment around what can municipalities do around building childcare supply. And they said, well, here are the things we're already doing, right? We're incorporating childcare into our organizational goals and priority-based budgeting. I already told you that story. We're investing. We have CDBG and ARPA dollars that are going specifically to childcare businesses to a total of $1.7 million. Our zoning ordinance has been amended to eliminate special land use for childcare. That saves folks cost and time. And BC Transit covers no-cost transportation for children and offers DHHS fare passes at discounted price. So they're looking at it holistically, right? If people take the bus to get to those things, can they actually afford it, and can we help there? They are considering these things. I'm not going to read all of them, but I do want to point out at the end, consider proposing an increase to the millage rate to create a set-aside. Like, these are things that municipalities have within their reach and their grasp. They need the public and political will to do it, and we can help them with that, right? Okay, City of Detroit, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Back to my municipality folks here. Just like Kathy was talking about Battle Creek, the City of Detroit recognized that they had barriers to entry for starting and growing childcare in the city. So they went through their whole zoning policy and stripped out some things that were barriers to entry. Childcares are now allowed in residential districts, light and heavy density residential districts. They had a requirement for all outdoor play areas had to have a flat 2,000 square foot requirement. If you have 2 kids, why do you need 2,000 square feet of outdoor space? So now centers need 100 square feet per child or 1,000 square feet. They've also changed their parking requirements based on employees at the facility, not the capacity of the center. They've also gone through and tried to find suitable outdoor spaces that don't need to be directly connected to the facility. If you have to walk across the street to the park, maybe that is a sufficient enough outdoor facility for them to use at this time when we're in such a crunch.
Yeah, thank you. So on this roadmap that we're developing for our EDOs and our municipalities is the idea that we're going to create a portal for them to be looking at these examples. Because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So we'll have case studies, we'll have examples, we will have tools and assessments that you can use so that you can understand what you can do. What we need you to do is actually do them, right? It is not something that is usually on a lot of these folks' radar to do. It's for somebody else to do. But again, all of us have a role to play. We need to step up when we can. The roadmap for economic developers, again, there are 7 different strategies that are very explicitly researched and can tell you what it is you can do differently. Some of it's low-hanging fruit. Some of it, I remember Bronwyn, when she was completing the assessment, she's like, there's some things here that are so obvious, I can't believe we hadn't thought about them before. Right? Sometimes it's just about exposure, so we want to make sure that you're looking at it through that lens. I want to lift up BCU. I know everybody's going to say Battle Creek's my favorite, and it is. But BCU has been a great partner to us because not only have they said, yes, we need to help fix childcare, but they've actually been at the table with us along. So what does that look like? They're our partner with our childcare champions. They provide us space, connection, relationship building, tools. They are part of our steering committee for this project. They have conducted the employee surveys when and where that's needed. So our champion said, we want to survey our workforce, but we're a little concerned that if we do it and it comes from us, they're going to think we're actually going to do something around childcare. If we could have that, right? Buffer, right, of BCU doing it and saying this is really part of a larger thing we're doing, then maybe it gives us a little bit of space. What they found out is that really wasn't an issue. It wasn't as big a concern as some had thought it would be, but it was front of center, and BCU stepped up and said, we'll conduct the surveys. Let us do that. They're integrating things into their retention visits now, so they're talking about childcare in those retention visits, where before it may not have come up, right? And they are connecting employers with childcare business owners and folks with land and resources. So these are some examples of what an EDO is doing, an economic development organization that is very specifically geared towards childcare. So I want to talk about inspiration for a little bit. There is something called redevelopment ready communities. Anybody here know of that? No, because we are, yeah, thank you. A couple of people know that. And I just want to name something here. You will notice municipalities were all invited today, and we didn't know until last week that they have a state convention that's going on right now. So their absence is not because they aren't interested, it's because they are otherwise engaged, and we're going to make sure that we get input from them very deeply. But as we were engaging our municipalities, some had said, hey, we do this thing called redevelopment ready certification. It's a checklist, MEDC helps us with it, and then it helps position us better for investments. And if I'm a developer, I know I want to go to that community because it's going to be easier for me to navigate. Am I getting that right for the folks that do that? Okay. So we thought, what if there was a childcare ready community? What if we went through the same process for municipalities, maybe for our economic developers, to identify what it is they're doing to reduce those barriers for those folks? So if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to start a childcare business, I'm going to go to those communities where they're actually receiving me in ways that I know it's going to be easier to navigate. So I've met with MEDC, they're very interested in this, and we're looking at what it would look like to pilot it. So these are the kind of innovations that are coming up while we're planning, right? We're not waiting for a plan to be done to start doing things when they make sense. I talked about Canada earlier. I just am really, this is great. And what they know is that, for anybody who's been following this, Quebec was the first province who actually instituted this policy of no more than $10 a day for childcare. In the years since they've done it, their GDP raised 1.7%. Now, to me, not an economist, that doesn't seem like a big number. I've been told it's pretty significant, right? So if we could do that, I mean, I'm thinking about it. No time. Vermont, I'm going to encourage you to Google what Vermont is doing. It's really exciting, but we got to move on to your table conversations. So we're going to move on to that. So we're going to go. Are you ready to accept your mission? Yes. No, everybody stand up for a minute. Just stand up for 1 minute, if you can. We're going to get some. Just move your feet, move your arms. It's a long Now I hope you can all sit back down when we have to, but if you want to stand, I'm going to go over exactly what you can expect to do at your table, okay? So part of this is going to be irrelevant because you're already at your county's table, so I'm glad we did that earlier. You have a facilitator at your table. They should have identified themselves already. They're going to be typing notes. You are going to be discussing at your table the questions that are on that worksheet. Your facilitator will guide you for it. I want to make sure that every voice is heard. If you were like me, I'm a talker and I could take up a lot of room. Step back if you're the one doing all the talking and let somebody else talk. We want to make sure that you stay curious, so get very interested in what you're hearing, be bold, take notes for yourself, and your facilitator will be taking them for you, and then stay until the end. That's when the good stuff happens. So we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. You're listening respectfully. You commit to learning and not debating. If you are a debater, this is not the place for it. And you want to criticize ideas and not people. So let's make sure that we don't have any personal attacks. Not that I expect that, but it's important to say. Well, I just ruined your night. Sorry. I wish it was an hour. It's not. We're going to give you 20 minutes to have this conversation, and we're going to do a quick report out. So you guys get to it, and I'll be floating around, and thank you. Oh, is the bar still open? Okay, bar is still open, so if there's anybody who needs some refresh, there's still some food.
Hey, Kathy. The live stream, I have the QR code up already for them. So it's going to be this little camera there.
So what do I want to say? Oh, hi, folks.
We're going to end the live stream here. If they want to follow along, they can scan the QR code and
Okay, yes,
continue the activity.
right now?
Step to the right a little bit. Yeah, not right, sorry. And then the blue light. There we go.
We are going to end, are we good?
Yeah.
We are going to end the live stream now. If you want to continue engaging, please go to the QR code that you have, and you can complete the worksheet there, and we'll make sure we get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've made notes for myself to try and obviously there's a top caption.